Hey there guys, how's it going? Today I'm going to show you guys a tutorial on how you can make a very simple but effective jump scare to unsettle the player by making a physics object jump out when they are looking at it. This technique has been used in many games like Outlast, also Amnesia, probably a bunch of others, and I'm going to show you how to replicate it here in Unreal so that when we turn this corner and we stare at this bookshelf, whoa, a book comes flying out the second it comes into view. So let's learn how we can do this. All right, so I'm using Unreal Engine 5.7, and I've just created this little small hallway from the default first-person template projects map. And I've also imported a couple of meshes. If you want to use these, I've included them down in the description. It's this bookshelf as well as a little book that we can use to throw out of the bookshelf. For the texture map though, since it is a pixel art texture, you want to make sure you right click on this, go to Sprite Actions and hit Apply Paper 2D Texture Settings. That's just going to make sure there's no blurring going on of the pixels. And then the material is real simple. Just make sure it's set to blend mode masked and that you drag the alpha of your texture into the opacity mask. And that's really it. But of course you can use whatever mesh you like. This method works with pretty much anything. All right, so let's get started here. In our content drawer, I'm going to go to our folder here and make a folder called Blueprints. Open that up and make a new blueprint class of type actor. Could call that BP underscore simple jump scare. We'll open that up and we're going to add a couple of components to it. I'm going to add a static mesh, which we're going to name our object. We're going to set the mesh to be our book that we imported. And I'm also going to set simulate physics to true. Now, on top of that, we're going to add a sphere collision, which is going to be our object hitbox. And I'm going to, first of all, size it to be about the size of the book. And come down to the collision presets, change it to custom. And under visibility, hit block instead of overlap. Now last, we're going to need a box collision, which we're going to call our trigger box. And I'm going to make sure that this is instead attached to the default scene root and not the object. Great. So now in our begin play, we're going to take our object here and immediately set simulate physics to off. We're going to disable the physics. We don't want it moving until we say so. In order to tell, we're going to go into our trigger box on the components, scroll all the way down, and implement our onComponent begin overlap and onComponent end overlap functions. Hit the plus button on both of those, bring them into the event graph. And we're going to check that the actor that we're overlapping is our player character. So I'm going to type in equals and then get player character. And then by holding down B and left clicking on our graph, I can create a branch really quickly. I'm going to do that a lot. And then we're going to connect up our Boolean into our branch and copy and paste this down to our end overlap as well. Great. Now we need a function to tell whether or not the player is looking at our object so that we can trigger our jump scare. So I'm going to come down to functions, hit the plus button, and I'm going to make a new function called isObservable. And we're going to check if this object here is within view range of the player's camera. So let's go ahead and get the world location from this object. And then get our player character as well. And get the actor location of our player character. And we're going to find the look at rotation. Find look at rotation between these two, with the object being the start and the player character being the target. From that rotation, we're going to get forward vector. And this is going to be a vector variable of our object facing our player. Now we need the player's camera forward vector. So we're going to get the player controller, not the character, the controller. And we're going to get the control rotation from that, which is our camera's current rotation. And we'll get the forward vector from that rotation. Now we have two forward vectors. We're going to get the dot product between the two and multiply that by -1, since it will be negative, and check if that is greater than or equal to a new variable. Promote that to a variable. We'll call this look at threshold. Compile. And this is going to be a 0 to 1 value. The closer to 1 it is, the more exact our camera has to be pointed at the object in order for it to trigger. I'm going to say something like 0.7 to begin here. And then I'm going to drag off the isObservable and type in return, make a return node. And we're going to hook this Boolean into a return node as isObservable. Now we're going to need one more function to return this, or to do this function continuously, essentially. Because if we just call this once, there's a chance that the player isn't even looking at the object. So we need to check over and over and over again. So let's make a function called updateObservable. And in here, we're just going to take our isObservable, hook it up. And for now, we're going to do a print string with our Boolean hooked into our string. Now in our event graph, we need to trigger this update observable to run over and over again. So we're going to set timer by event. Immediately, we're going to take this return value here it creates, and we're going to drag off to promote to a variable. And we're going to call this timer underscore update observable. And down here on our end overlap, I'm going to take that timer update observable. I'm going to drag off it, and I'm going to type in clear and invalidate timer by handle. So that way we shut this timer off when we are outside of the trigger box, when we leave it. Now for the event, we're going to drag off and hit create event. And we're going to search for our update observable. We want this to happen every 0.01 seconds. And we want it to loop, obviously. And now we should be good to test, I believe. Let's go ahead and drag our simple jump scare out into the world. Rotate it 90 degrees, 180 degrees. And slot it into our bookshelf here. You want to be careful and make sure it's not touching anything, because it is going to have physics enabled at some point. So we want to make sure that it's not inside any objects, preventing it from doing what it's supposed to. Now I'm going to, in the details panel here in the viewport, I'm going to grab the trigger box and edit that separate from everything else. Drag it out and scale it up. And just make it extend past this corner here. So we have a pretty large trigger radius there. And if I play from here, you'll see that now when I enter our trigger box, we start getting a return value of false printing to our screen. And as I move my camera to look at our object, it changes to true. Not looking at it, false, looking at it, true. Not false, looking at it, true. However, it doesn't take into consideration any other object. So even if I'm all the way around this wall and there's no chance I could see it, it's still returning true. So we need to make sure that there's nothing blocking the player's sight to that object, as well as whether or not we're actually looking at it. So in our isObservable function here, I'm going to go ahead and comment this out as check if player's camera is facing the object. So that's our first Boolean check. Our second one is going to be from a line trace by channel node. We're going to hook this into isObservable, and we're going to type in get player character so that we can get the actor location. And we're going to trace from the actor, so the player character will be start, to our object. Get world location of our object, and hook that into end. And now what we need to do is test if our out hit will break that hit result. We want to make sure that our hit component equals our object hitbox here. We want to make sure that our player can at least see our object hitbox. If they can't see the object hitbox, it should not go through. However, there's going to be a few things we need to worry about here. One, the player character is not part of this blueprint, so it's actually going to register as a valid actor to hit this line trace. So we're just going to need to drag off the player character here and make an array from it that we can hook into the actors to ignore. That way our line trace ignores our player character's collision and just goes straight forward to our object. Now it's also going to ignore our object because ignore self is ticked. So we want to leave that unchecked so that we do collide with our object and we can test if it's our object hitbox or not. So if there was a hit, if there was any hit on a branch, we're going to return an AND value between these two Booleans. Into isObservable. Just clean that up a bit. All right, so now it should only fire when we are both looking at it and can actually see it. Let's play and start. Looks like it's working, but I'm also just going to set the debug type to draw for one frame, just so I can see what's going on here. There we go. So you'll see that when we're not capable of seeing it, we're returning false, but right as we are, it's true. If we look away, it's going to return false. Both of those conditions have to be true in order for the jump scare to trigger. So let's go ahead and do just that. Let's make the jump scare trigger now. You can set this back to draw debug type none. And in our update observable function, instead of this print string, we're going to do a branch. And on true, we're going to go into a new event that we'll make in our event graph. New custom event, which we'll call trigger jump scare. So an update observable on true, we're going to trigger jump scare. And what this function or this event's going to do is we're going to take our timer. We're going to clear and invalidate that. We want it to stop checking if the player can see it, because we can see it. And we're also going to set simulate physics to be true. And then we're also going to destroy the trigger box component, just so that there's no chance that we can trigger this jump scare again once it's been triggered already. We can also get rid of the object hitbox too if we want. Not necessary, but just cleaned. Can hook those into the same destroy component. Great. Now let's go ahead and test this. As soon as I walk into this, we won't see anything happen right away because it's probably too subtle for us to even notice. So what we're going to need to do is add a force, or an impulse, sorry. We're going to add impulse to our object here. Just reroute that. And we're going to control the impulse by going into our object here in the viewport and adding a arrow component so that we can easily switch the direction that we'd like our object to fly in. I'm going to rename this to force, or force direction. And then I'm going to make a new variable called force amount, AMT, and make that a float. We'll try something like 500 for now and test from there. I'm also going to make the force amount instance editable and expose on spawn so that we can edit it at any time. And then our impulse, we're going to get our force direction, get the forward vector. And all we're going to do is multiply that by our force amount. And that'll be our impulse. And we're going to check velocity change as well, so that it updates the total velocity and not just adds to it. I believe we should be good with that. Let's give it a test now. If I play from here, walk into the trigger box. Oh, look at that. Our book flies out. You can play a little stock sound effect. Force amount, maybe a tad too much. Let's change that back to 250. Play again. Bang. Scary. And it will only happen when the player is expressly looking at that object. So if I walk in here and I'm not even paying attention to that bookshelf, the second I snap my camera, whoa, what was that? And there you go. That's how you create a simple jump scare.